Welcome to the MIT Social Entrepreneurship Alumni Group Zoom event, 5 Steps to Scale Up Social Enterprises. I am Sayuri Sharper, President of SEAG and moderator of today's conversation. Today, we welcome Alden Zecha to lead this seminar. Alden is a founding partner at consulting firm We Scale Impact. We Scale Impact focuses on assisting early stage social enterprise clients, especially in emerging markets, leveraging 30+ years of broad range executive experience and work in 35+ countries. Alden is also a senior fellow at the Center for Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and a managing director of Boston-based angel investment group SideCar Angels. He received his MSE and BSE with honors in chemical engineering from Princeton University and holds a certificate in finance from the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. In this seminar, Alden will guide you through the 5 steps to scale up a social enterprise. He will start with an overview presentation of these 5 stages. Then I will play the role of a hypothetical for-profit social entrepreneur who is seeking Alden's advice. Alden will provide advice to challenges experienced by entrepreneurs at different stages of the company development. The Q&A is not just for the fictitious entrepreneur, but also for you. You are invited to ask your questions and get individualized answers as well. You can use the Q&A button and type in your questions anytime during the presentation. There is no need to wait for any breaks. Enter them and I'll read these questions in parallel with questions from the fictitious entrepreneur. In addition, Alden has agreed to a 30-minute one-on-one mentoring to 5 social entrepreneurs that are participating in today's webinar at no cost. If you're interested, please email me with a brief description of your questions, and I will forward the first 5 requests to Alden to schedule the sessions. Thank you, Alden, for your generous offer. Before we get started, I'd like to say a few words about SEAG. SEAG is organized under MIT Alumni Association. Our mission is to bring together MIT alum and like-minded people to co-create a better world through social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Terminology is important. What do we mean by social entrepreneurship? Any organization that is addressing unmet social need or environmental problem through a market-driven approach. And impact investments are investments made with the intent to contribute measurable positive social or environmental impact. If any of you are not a SEAG member yet, I'd like to invite you to join us. In addition to webinars, we also host live pitch sessions, mentoring programs, and other networking events to connect our members to each other. To join, please go to mit-seag.mn.co. Now I'd like to introduce you to Alden.
Thank you so much, Sayuri. Thank you, and I'm very glad to be here with the MIT SEAG group today. Looking forward to this session and working with you as well as the audience participants. Again, please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box, which is most likely at the bottom of your Zoom window there. And we'll try and answer those questions as we go along with today's presentation. With that, let me screen share to my slides here, and we'll get right into the overview of the presentation that we have. Here we go. So here at WeScale Impact, we use a 5-step or 5-phase approach to working with social enterprises, depending on the stage they're in. And I'm going to give an overview presentation now of what those stages are and what they address. And then afterwards, as Sayuri mentioned, we'll go through a fictitious, hypothetical situation that Sayuri has created of an entrepreneur's journey through these various steps. So the 5 steps to scaling, as we see them, are first, opportunity identification, then research and diligence, next, the launch phase, the operation phase, and finally, the expansion phase. So you can see these 5 steps are not just bringing the enterprise to the launch phase. In fact, they move through the launch phase and all the way until the expansion or growth and scaling phase. So the first stage here is opportunity identification. And I should be clear that these phases in my discussions today are not specific to for-profit enterprises. They are both applicable to for-profit and nonprofit enterprises. And I've intentionally kept some of the content a little broader and higher level so that we can be more inclusive with the various organizational structures and approaches that the audience participants have today. So with that in mind, opportunity identification. This is our first step in the journey. Really, before you can go anywhere, you have to understand what you're doing and what you want to achieve. So in addition to having an idea, though, which I think most social entrepreneurs or people who want to get involved in social entrepreneurship, they understand they need an idea. It's critically important that you have a viable business model and that you have an understanding of what that service or product that you have or want to offer is. And let me be clear again, business model does not mean for profit. Please don't confuse the two. It may very well be a nonprofit, but you still need to have a viable business model because you need to be able to think about how you're going to be sustainable, financially sustainable going forward. And then as you're crafting that initial idea, think about looking at what are the opportunities that you want to address and what are your initial insights on those in the research, and how might you apply your skills, your experience, your knowledge to maximize the likelihood of success, the likelihood of long-term viability for whatever your venture is. And I will use the words venture and enterprise and organization somewhat interchangeably in today's talk. So please don't get hung up on necessarily any one individual one of those words. As you look at that, in this early phase of opportunity identification, one of the big ideas is to also make sure that you're not just offering something exactly the same as someone else's with no incremental value add. Because by definition, if you're doing that with no value add, then likely you're not going to succeed. And either the competition will overtake you and in essence win out, or you will end up in a situation where your ability to address the market and get value will be as strong. Right? I'll try and speak a little bit louder.
Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm getting questions that your audio is not coming through very well. It was okay in the beginning, but there's, I guess, some noise. I don't know if there's anything you can do to fix that.
Let me make an adjustment here on my side. Let's see if this helps. Is this any better?
I think so.
All right, well, we'll try that.
Maybe it's about the same.
Okay. Well, let me see. I can try something else here. Let me try one other thing. One moment. I apologize. You may see my head moving around a little bit here. Is this better now? Is this any better?
There's still a bit of a noise.
All I'm not sure what it is. I am using a headphone setup here and I am plugged in, and I've tried to turn off all extraneous electronic devices that might be causing any interference.
Yeah. Someone suggests that maybe it's because you're using your PC microphone.
I am not. I am using a headset. And it's actually a noise canceling headset. There is a construction yard right across the street from me here, so it could be that in the background.
I think we can still hear, so why don't we just continue?
All right.
We'll do the best we can.
All right, and I apologize to the audience and to those listening on the recording about the sound quality. So opportunity identification is largely to decide what you're going to offer, what is your product or service, and to make sure that you have a viable business model. And again, viable is a relative term. I understand that. Let's move forward. What is the next step? The next step after you've determined what you're going to offer is really doing some initial research and diligence on the marketplace, on the opportunity in more depth. So obviously one would expect that in opportunity identification, you've done a little bit of this, at least a little bit of understanding, research, and so on and so forth. But the idea here is, can you now, with greater depth of research and greater depth of diligence, determine whether or not the opportunity is really one, not only is it viable, but is it one that you want to pursue? I often see entrepreneurs or innovators who determine that there's an opportunity, but they're just not interested in it. And that's fine, because if you're not interested in your opportunity, then you will, by definition, not be as successful in driving it forward. So keep that in mind. Again, I emphasize here, refining that business model to make sure that you will be financially sustainable. And again, sustainable does not mean profitable. But if you are a nonprofit, will you be able to generate enough in donations, in grants, or in earned revenue to be able to cover your cost structure going forward? So making sure that at least you have that sustainable aspect, right? And understand these steps in here are very iterative, or they can be very iterative. So it could be a situation where you do some of these steps, you learn some things, you refine, you do it again, so on and so forth, right? Where feasible, bring in local market expertise. If you're targeting a particular geography, a particular region, particular culture, please make sure that you've thought about what are the aspects in that region, geography, culture that apply to your business, to your offering, and have you taken that into account? Are they culturally appropriate? Are they culturally sensitive? Are your price points even acceptable within that geography? They may not be, because there are clearly different abilities to pay in different marketplaces. So local knowledge is also very important. And then think really holistically about all stakeholders in the marketplace, trying to understand not just what are the views of your beneficiaries or your payers, but also what are the views of investors or funders, and they could be donors, again, if it's a nonprofit, or governmental views. How will they be either favorable or unfavorable toward your idea, and what does that mean? After the research and diligence phase, we move to the launch phase. The launch phase is fairly straightforward, of course. Yes, there's legal, regulatory, and this goes beyond the legal regulatory steps, looking really at setting up the organization to succeed long-term. So we talk a lot about quality. Quality, not just in what is the service or the product, but quality in terms of really instilling that in the culture of the organization, building that culture of quality performance. We often recommend using balanced scorecards as a method of doing that. It's not the only method, but a method, right? Can you think about robust governance structures? Are you establishing a strong governance structure and strong MEL, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems, right? Have you thought about human resources and what we would call future talent opportunities, right? Is there a talent strategy? And things of that sort to keep in mind. And then, of course, your PR strategy, your marketing strategy, just as you would in any organization. And then finally, again, tying into that local community, tying into the local network to make sure your launch is the most successful. Now, of course, each step that I'm outlining here presumes that you have been successful in the prior steps. It is a somewhat linear path. It's not perfectly linear at times, but it is somewhat linear. Now let's move to the next step, operation. In the operation step, the organization is running, you're offering your product or service, you have some hopefully satisfied, happy customers, clients, beneficiaries, and those different words depends on what you're offering in your structure. But as we enter operations, we often work with organizations to help them by supporting their C-level executives. And whether it's us or someone else, thinking about getting those mentors, those coaches, those advisors to help supplement the team with necessary experience, skills, or networks at times, right? Also, think about how you can continue to refine your approaches to obtaining customers and retaining them, more importantly, and examining the impact you're having, right? Whether that's through dashboards or other things. And of course, there are what I would call normal business steps. Again, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, such as thinking about marketing and sales and HR and all those operational aspects. And then looking, especially in social enterprises, at partnerships. Can you work with and cooperate with other organizations, whether public or private or both, to help scale and grow more efficiently? So all of this has to do with operation. Just because you've launched the organization does not mean you'll be successful, and that isn't sufficient. You need to be operating well to be able to be sustainable. Finally, after operations, we have the last step of the pathway, which is expansion, the growth phase, if you will. And we think about expansion in different areas. There can be expansion in new business offerings. There can be expansion geographically to new locations, to new regions, to new continents even, right? But there could also be looking at expansion in certain particular verticals or subsegments of your business or your organization. We believe that growth and expansion should always be planned and not just happen, if you will, because you'll be more successful if you planned it out well and if you've really thought that through. In addition, it's important, in our opinion, to prioritize those action steps to really make sure that you understand what you're going to be doing, when, and what's the highest priority so that you can be best positioned for strong expansion. And then finally, where feasible, leveraging tools, infrastructure, automation to scale more quickly, more easily, and of course, more cost effectively. So with that, let me just give you a quick summary then of the 5 steps I just went through, which are opportunity identification, research and diligence, launch, operation, and expansion. And so with that quick overview, and I know it was very rapid, but with that quick overview, we're now going to move to a hypothetical situation, a hypothetical business, where Sayuri and I will discuss how I or my firm would support a social entrepreneur, and she's going to play the role of social entrepreneur. So let me stop sharing the screen now, and we'll get back to our videos here, and maybe Sayuri, there you go.
Yeah.
I can turn that on. And let's talk about that. And hopefully the audio is a little better. I don't know, but I'm hoping it is now, maybe a little bit better than it was. I'll keep speaking maybe a little bit more loudly and try and be a little bit more enunciate and speak a little more clearly into the microphone, because that might help as well. Please go ahead, Sayuri.
Yes. Thank you, Alden. Before we start, there's a question about the offer to submit an email to me with a description of their questions or the stage of their company, and when they should do that. Basically can submit to me, and it's sharper@alum.mit.edu. Anytime after today's session, and we will take the first 5. But do please describe what your issues are, so Alden will have a heads up on what you want to talk about.
Yeah, just discuss what your issues are, but also give us at least a little bit of background on what your organization or your proposal is for your enterprise, so we have an idea. And I've just thrown Sayuri's email in the chat so everyone can see it in case you missed her saying it. The email is now in the chat as well.
Thanks for doing that. So here I am playing the role of Joe, who is a software engineer, who is interested in starting a for-profit social enterprise. The problem that she has identified is in impact finance. She would like to develop a solution that reduces the time and resources spent by nonprofits fundraising, and for donors to know the impact generated from those donations. She thinks she can develop a decentralized impact finance platform to solve this problem. There are millions of nonprofits and billions of dollars of donation given each year. She's confident that the market potential for this platform is huge. Now that she's ready to commit herself to start this company, what should she do next? So she is asking Alden, what are the initial steps?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for that. One of the first things I'd ask Joe here is to think about making sure that the offer, whatever Joe's organization is going to offer, product or service, is fairly focused. That doesn't mean that eventually Joe may end up in a situation where the offering is very broad, spans multiple segments or sectors. But oftentimes we see launch or initial opportunity identification stage entrepreneurs trying to do too many things too quickly, spreading themselves so thin that honestly, they don't do any of them well. So in the description that Joe just gave, one of the concerns I would have is that there seem to be two aspects of what the offering is. One is helping nonprofits to fundraise, and the other is helping donors to better understand the impact that those nonprofits are having. And the solution is probably somewhat different for each of those. So think about focusing on one of those aspects to start. And again, that doesn't mean you can't add other aspects in the future during expansion phase. But in the beginning, really, what is the focus and what are the goals you're trying to achieve in that regard, right? So that's one aspect. Another aspect I would say is, as you think about this idea, Joe, what is your business model? Who do you think will be paying you, or who do you think will be contributing money? Again, the description is it's a for-profit, so the likelihood for donations or grants would be fairly low. So you need to be thinking about what's the source of revenue, who will be paying you. And let me be clear, in most for-profit social enterprises, there are multiple parties that will be revenue stream generators or revenue payers. And the reason often is because no single payer may have enough financial resources to pay, or may have the value derived that they want to pay the full amount necessary for the business to stay viable and profitable. So those are some things. And I'd also ask whether Joe has really mapped the opportunity well in terms of the demand and competitors, right? Are there other competitors out there doing things similar? Where are Joe's points of differentiation? And of course, is there really a true opportunity? Has Joe done any market research to better understand that? And some of that market research, of course, spills into the next phase. But let me throw it back to Joe and say, Joe, how are things progressing, and what have you been able to do?
So here is the next step in Joe's venture. So there is a large homeless housing project in her city. A nonprofit would like to provide social services to tenants in affordable housing properties. Donors, however, are willing to fund these services only if the nonprofit can show concrete impact. So Joe negotiates with a nonprofit and agrees to deliver an impact tracking system that allows each tenant, that shows each tenant's progress. She now has her initial funding from this nonprofit. She starts to develop the software platform. Should she be doing something before or in parallel with developing this software solution?
My immediate answer is yes, Joe, you should be doing some things definitely, in my opinion, before you start writing software code here. Again, this is obviously a limited limited description given the hypothetical. But I think that, let me take the first stage and say the positive aspect here is Jo has narrowed her focus, right? You can hear that she's now looking really at focusing more on helping the donors to see their impact, because that's what donors are willing to pay for. So we've changed a little bit the focus from the earlier phase where Jo was looking at potentially two aspects, helping donors understand impact, but also helping the nonprofits raise funding, right? In this case, now Jo has narrowed and said, no, you know what? The offering is going to be helping donors understand their impact. And of course, that will naturally help nonprofits get more funding, but that's not the core value proposition that Jo is now focusing on. It's terrific to hear that Jo has been able to find potential paying opportunity to implement her solution and to use that then, or to leverage that as a pilot to test out some ideas, test out, in this case, software functionality in the future as well, right? So a few things I would think about here, probably again, before Jo starts spending too much time writing software, is there really a long-term viable business model? We haven't discussed how much these donors are willing to pay Jo. So, get some information, find out how much are they willing to pay, and do some rough calculations at a minimum. They don't have to be overly precise. We don't need perfection to the penny here, but we do need to know whether that money that's going to be paid for this project will at least be able to cover the incremental or marginal costs going forward. Not the one-time setup cost, not the one-time initial code writing cost, but looking at those incremental maintenance costs. And depending on what the software solution is, if it's in the cloud, of course, there's hosting and there's maintenance. There might be support. There might be the need for technical assistance, customer support. All of those costs ongoing. Is the fee that the client is going to pay going to cover those costs? So again, looking at financial sustainability is very important. And of course, your initial first client in this case may not pay enough. And that's okay, as long as you can see a viable pathway to long-term financial sustainability. It doesn't have to be with your first client, let me be clear, but long-term is very, very important. In addition, Jo hasn't really talked about whether she's looked at competitors in this space. Are there adjacent offerings that might be complementary that she should potentially partner with? We haven't discussed that, and I think that'd be something that we'd probably explore a little bit more here with Jo, is who are the competitors, if there are any, and if there are competitors, what's the incremental value add that you see, Jo, versus those existing competitors? And then again, are there partners that you should ally with and combine with to better offer your solution and maybe to team up with them?
Okay, here we have a question from the audience
Sure.
about her business, or him, Hannah, heard. She says, I have a social startup that is technology driven. It's quite an investment and risk to scale up without confirming all of our assumptions. But at the same time, I feel a pressure to scale up as soon as possible to become financially sustainable.
Yeah.
How would you deal with the pressure for becoming profitable in the first stage of the social startup?
Well, so one of the questions here I'd ask immediately for Hannah is, and I'm just going to hypothesize the answer, so sorry, Hannah, is have you taken outside investment and are you being pressured? Who's creating the pressure, right? Is it outside investors that are creating pressure? Is it yourself? Is it your colleagues, your coworkers? Because if it's yourself, I would argue maybe you should think about why you're feeling that pressure. If, however, it's an external party like your colleagues or co-founders or an investor, then that is a different source of pressure. And you need to have a discussion with them about, first, how realistic is that pressure and the risks associated with it. Scaling up too quickly can destroy an organization. That doesn't mean you shouldn't scale up, let me be clear, but too quickly, and that is a relative judgment term, can really ruin the organization because it may not be ready for that, right? So there is this balance to be found between the speed to scale and the comfort level, if you will, that the organization, the founders, the team have with scaling and growing. You're right, it is an investment, not just of money, but likely time to scale up as well. And there is high risk. So again, I don't know all the details of your situation, but have you at least proven that there is a viable solution that you're offering or a viable product or service, and that there is some market demand for it? That there's not just a need, let me be clear, there are many needs, but is there market demand in terms of willingness to pay or willingness to fund if you're donor driven or philanthropically driven? So I think these are all questions I would ask in order to help you think about how do you balance the pressure to scale versus the ability to take a little bit more time and maybe spend more time building a solid foundation that will better prepare you for scale. So what is the time frame that whoever's generating the pressure is thinking about? Is that 6 months? Is that 3 years? Because the answer would be very, very different. And what are those risks? And have you transparently discussed those risks with whomever is generating the pressure? And again, if that's yourself, have you just thought about what those risks are and whether those risks are worth taking at this time? It doesn't mean they won't be worth taking in the future. So hopefully that was helpful to Hannah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alden. And we have another question from Frederick.
Sure.
And this question relates to regulatory issues. So the question is how to successfully address different regulatory and legal issues, especially focus on privacy in a multi-geographic digital solution.
Sure. So in fact, I worked on a project earlier this year where it was a multinational organization handling individual data, private data, the equivalent of Social Security and national ID information, age, gender, and the data included information on children. So even more sensitive because it had data about minors as well. And really worked with them. First step was, what are the regulations? Let's just even understand what are those regulations, right? Getting a hold of the listing of these are the laws in each of the countries where they were going to work. And what do those regulations require? So in some of the countries, the data had to be retained in country. That was a requirement. In other countries, it did not, but it had to be retained in region. In some cases, for example, like the EU, that's often the case. Or you had to get waivers from the data owner, the individuals, or in the case of children, their parent or guardian, in order to store the data elsewhere. And then we had a discussion around what's feasible. Can you get these waivers from these individuals or their parent or guardian? Is that even feasible? This assumes, first of all, that you have the ability to contact them, not always the case, and that they have the ability to read and write. Again, not always the case, especially in the markets where I was working with these individuals. We were looking at several African nations where literacy rates were not extremely high. And so that was a concern. And so we had to think through all that. And then the answer became, do we actually silo the data so that each country's data, because the laws in this case were mostly at the country level with the exception of the EU, do we silo the data per country so that we know that the data meets their legal regulatory regime, but is not commingled with any other data other than on a anonymized, aggregated basis that was allowed by each jurisdiction, where we could share anonymized, aggregated results across literally thousands of people. That data could be shared cross-border without any privacy concerns. So once we determined, and the answer was yes, we had to silo on a country-by-country basis, at least in most of the countries. They then had to change, honestly, because they were already operating, and they hadn't done this analysis until after they'd already expanded into countries. And so they had to then come into compliance, which meant they had to change their data structures. They had to change how and where their data was saved and stored, and of course, how it was aggregated and reported across their systems. So legal regulatory is important right from the beginning. It would have been much easier and cheaper for them had they understood all these regulations before launching, because now they had to go back and rewrite code. They had to rewrite their data structures. They had to separate and silo data. And it became a very time-consuming and to some extent expensive endeavor. So planning ahead is key, right? Understanding that and knowing ahead of time.
Okay, the next question is from Juan. Are there investors specifically dedicated to support scaling social enterprises, or what other funding is available for such purpose?
So there are some investors who only invest in social enterprises, so-called impact investors. There are individuals who do that. There are institutional investors. There are VC funds that are now set up around impact investment. Some of those, in fact, many of those, if we're talking institutionals, focus on particular verticals. So it could be healthcare, it could be education, it could be agriculture. And then some of them also focus around particular geographies. I was on a phone call last night with an impact investment VC that focuses exclusively on Southeast Asian agriculture, medical, and education. All right, so that's their focus. So there are these types of investors, Juan, that are out there. And then again, there are also individuals who personally only invest in impact ventures or impact situations. And then there are, of course, foundations that will donate or grant to philanthropically grant to social enterprises. And then there are some foundations that will make investments even in for-profit social enterprises under selected circumstances. Let me be clear. So not all cases, but there are some foundations that will make what are called program-related investments into certain enterprises, even if they're for-profit, as long as the social enterprise is focused on the area or areas that the foundation is focused on, whether that be geographic or industry or solution or target beneficiary. So yes, there are investors specific to this space.
All right, so we encourage you to keep going with your questions. In the meantime, we're gonna go back to Joan. So Joan has won 3 other contracts from nonprofit to provide them with impact tracking solutions. Although there's customization for each nonprofit, the core software is shared and extendable. To accelerate the company growth, she would like to raise outside capital. How does she prepare for this initial raise?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. I mean, I think one of the things I'd immediately say is, as you think about raising your outside capital, understand a few things. First, are you prepared to accept that capital? And I don't mean, do you have a bank account, an obvious one, but more, is the organization ready? Do you have the right structure? Do you have a solid culture in place? Do you have a plan for HR, for talent, for growth as an organization? Because when you take in that money, there will be pressure to grow, which was Hannah's question earlier, right? There will be a lot of pressure to grow and scale more quickly. And you might be ready for it, and that'd be great, Joe, if you are. But really, you should be doing a bit of a self-check and saying, are we ready to scale or not? So we at We Scale Impact, we actually have a questionnaire we've developed, an online tool we use with our clients to help them assess, are they ready to grow and scale? And if not, what are the areas where they may need some additional support before they're ready to grow and scale, right? So all of that comes to mind. Is there a plan as to what are you going to do with this money? Is it just, and I don't mean to make it sound minimal, but is it to hire more coders and develop more software? That's fine. Is it, however, to do maybe other things, marketing, sales, promotion? Maybe it's to bring in better operations internally, customer support, all of these things. But what's the plan with the funds? Are you ready to accept them and to really use them to the best of your ability, right? In addition, understand that as you transition through this launching phase and bringing in incremental capital to help you grow now, as a leader, assuming that you are the leader and maybe you're just a participant, I don't know, but if you're the leader of the organization, are you ready to lead with a different set of pressures now? Again, coming back to Hannah's question, a different set of priorities potentially, because these outside investors will want to see certain results, whether those are financial results or impact results, will depend on who they are, but they're going to ask you for that, right? And how do the, let's say, measures of success that those investors will have for your organization, how do those line up with your measures of success as the founder or as the lead executive driving it? I've seen, unfortunately, some organizations where they've taken outside investment and then the founder leader has recognized that the outside investors want X as the goal, whether that's impact, whether that's scale, whatever that may be. And the leader founder wants Y as the goal, and those are mutually exclusive. And now you have this conflict, and it's a big problem. So you want to really think that through before you take the money, because if there is going to be a conflict, you either should not take the money or at least have a discussion with a potential investor to resolve the conflict before it happens.
Okay, so here is a question from Hannah again. What would be a good strategy to approach or find an impact investor in comparison to normal investors? Do you think impact investors are more likely to fund a project with high risks of success if there is a high potential for positive effect on the environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hannah. So it's kind of a two-part question. The first question or part is, what's a strategy to approach to find impact investors versus normal investors? And I would say, really, there isn't a different strategy per se. It's a matter of using different screening, different tools, different criteria to find your impact investor or investors who will be focused on you. And there are online databases. You can use search engines. There are different ways. There's also a lot of impact investing is done, not surprisingly, through networking, telling people what you're offering, finding the right connections, and then going from there. So that's a big part of it. In answer to your second question, which is, are impact investors more likely to invest in something that's high risk, but potentially high return? And when you said high risk of success, I understand that, of impact success, but potentially high return. That depends a lot on the investor themselves. Different investors have different criteria. Some are more what I would call conservative, meaning that they are less likely to take risk, but they recognize the impact they may have may be smaller, not as large, and others are high risk. You have impact investors who are what are literally called moonshot investors, where they are investing in enterprises where the chance of success is very small, but if successful, the impact is huge, right? So for example, some aspects of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where they've been investing in anti-malaria vaccines. The likelihood of success of an anti-malaria vaccine statistically is tiny. It's very, very small. But if successful, it will save tens of thousands of lives. So that's important. And you need to keep that in mind, right?
And here's another question from one.
Sure.
Again, on funding scale, could you please suggest any specific institution funding women inclusion in Latin America?
So I'd have to think about that. At top of my head, I can't think of any institution specifically funding women's inclusion in Latin America. But I'd also ask as a follow-up, which because it's not specific, is what do you mean by women's inclusion? Do you mean in the workforce? Do you mean as beneficiaries of, say, healthcare or education? Women's inclusion is very, very broad as a potential concept. So we'd want to think about what it is. But top of mind, I can't think of any right now. But if it were the case where I could get more details, maybe I could point the person in the right direction. I'm not sure.
So I think one, it's an invitation for you to just write this question up, and I'll forward that to Alden, and you can maybe dig into that a little bit more. But sure. Continuing on to our hypothetical, so here Joe has actually successfully raised this angel round. The business is growing. She has hired a few managers, including a director of software development, director of finance, and director of sales. Every director reports to her and she makes the final decisions. She's working crazy hours, but has been able to keep the business moving forward. She knows that she needs more senior managers. How does she do this when she barely has enough time to sleep doing what is already on her plate?
Sure. And this is a traditional problem for many founders is you have no bandwidth, you're completely stretched too thin, you're barely getting any sleep, you probably have no personal life, at all. You're living, eating, and sleeping is your business, your organization, your venture. Very, very common to see. And this is one of the reasons why we really talk a lot about setting up that foundation in the launch phase, setting up the foundation of quality, setting up the foundation of having a plan for your talent strategy and your HR strategy, making sure that you have good processes in place, making sure that you have good measures about how you're monitoring your impact. How are you evaluating it? What are you learning from it? And how do you improve and refine? Because if you have those, you are less likely, not saying it's impossible, but less likely to get into this type of a bind, because you will have had a plan as to when to hire people and how to grow within the limits of your financial resources. And if finances become a limitation, it should have been part of the plan as well to think about, well, if this happens, then we need to raise money, or we need to charge our customers more, or we need to get more donations, or we need to get more grants, whatever the answer is, depending on your business model. But planning ahead is so critical. Again, thinking 1, 2, 3 years out, not 20 years out, let me be clear. I would never encourage people to think 20 years out and do a detailed plan. Maybe you think 20 years out and have a rough sketch at most, but having a reasonably detailed plan for the next 12, 18, 24 months is very applicable. And you might have at least a rough draft plan for 3 to 5 years, right? Using that as a guidepost and revisiting those plans every 3 to 6 months to see where you are. Are you moving faster than planned? Great if you are, but is that going to cause you problems? Are you ready for that? So really hearkening back to that earlier phase and thinking about lay the foundation, make sure you've got the plans in place, make sure you've got the ideas in place. And it doesn't mean you have to be an expert in all these things. Let me be clear. Again, bringing in advisors, bringing in mentors to help you with these challenges so you can plan ahead is also all part.
Great. So Alden, we have a question about whether or not we're going to make your hard copy presentation available, and will they
Sure.
be available? Sure. Okay. Great.
I'm happy to make the hard copy presentation available. So I'll send it to you and to MIT SEAG, and you can distribute it. I guess however you want to the people who have registered. But I'm happy to provide it to you. I'll provide it as a PDF file.
Okay, great. And the other part of the question is the recording. And the recording will be available as well. MIT Alumni Association takes a little bit of time to get the formatting right, and then it will be available. So if you are a SEAG member, we will let you know when the recording is posted.
And I see a question here from Hannah about HR or talent strategy. Let me just answer that right now. So Hannah's question is, can I give an example of a good talent strategy? I think one aspect to think about is the following, right? So there are different aspects of talent strategy. First is, as you grow and scale, what are the skills you're going to need and what is the capacity you're going to need for your organization as it grows? Skills means they may be changing as you hit different stages, you hit different growth. You may need people who are more specialized in certain aspects. You may need people who have more experience in certain aspects, right? You may need people who can manage others. Whereas in the beginning, if you only have 5 people, you may not need a lot of management skill. When you have 30 people, somebody needs to be managing aspects of that team. So management skills may become important. But in addition to that, one of the things I would point out as part of the talent strategy, and this is specific to whoever's on your team now, so it's harder to map this out, but as you begin bringing people onto the team, as you begin hiring people, you can work with this, which is think about whether those individuals, what are their career paths? First of all, some people may leave you for personal reasons. They may want to go to, say, graduate school. They may want to move across the country for personal reasons because their partner has left or is now in a different city and they want to be with them, which is very logical. So stage of life can be a factor as you think about career planning for your team. But another aspect that many entrepreneurs overlook is how does that individual fit into our evolving organizational culture? So there's a very, very different culture in an organization when you are 10 people or fewer versus when you're 25 people versus when you're, let's say, 50 or 60 people, and then versus when you're maybe 200 people, right? It's very different cultures, even though it may be the exact same product and service that you're offering, and you may be having the exact same impact on the community, other than it's larger at scale. But different people perform better at different stages of an organization, or some people. Not everyone is destined to be with an organization from founding through complete final scale of, say, 500 employees. There are some people who love being in the startup world and don't want to be anything else, but they may leave your organization when you get to be a certain size. That is not a knock on them. That doesn't make them bad people, but it does mean as you think about your talent strategy, you need to be understanding that you may need to replace those people at certain phases. So that's an aspect of a talent strategy that's very important. And I see another question here. Let me just quickly read it. So it says, in a company that is not cash rich, meaning you obviously don't have a lot of financial resources, how do you incentivize, I'm paraphrasing it, how do you incentivize employees and how do you set expectations? Well, setting expectations is going to be based on those future plans, right? Do you think you're going to have cash in the future? Do you think you'll be either able to offer, if you're for profit, does equity make sense? If you're a nonprofit, it does not make sense. Equity is meaningless in a nonprofit. But if you're cash poor in the beginning, think about other aspects. It could be that you're offering benefits and there could be non-cash benefits. So for example, pre-pandemic, working from home was often seen as a non-cash benefit. Having more vacation time may be a non-cash benefit. Flexible hours could be a non-cash benefit. Bringing your pet to work, bringing your child to work. Again, depending on how that may impact the rest of the team, you need to think about that. But that could be a benefit that you could offer. There are several things, right? I've seen people or organizations offer things like a benefit is every year we're going to have a team vacation somewhere where you can bring your partner and yourself and the company will pay for it. Now that does have an actual financial cost, but it also has a benefit. And depending on the location you choose, it may not be as expensive as you think. So there are different ways to offer non-cash benefit. Being purpose-driven, though, is a non-cash benefit. Explaining to employees why your organization is doing what it is. What is your vision? What is your mission, right? You can sometimes get people to volunteer for your organization. Be careful there, by the way, because sometimes volunteers actually take more work to manage than a paid employee. So don't assume a volunteer is necessarily the best. But why are those people volunteering? It's often because they see the vision, they are aligned with the mission, they want to align themselves with the purpose of your venture. So all of these things can come into play. Do not presume that money is the number one motivation for everyone. It is for some people, for sure, but it is not for everyone. So there are definitely these alternatives that you can offer to help offer to attract talent, to bring in talent. And you can also think about, does the talent need to be full-time or can it be part-time? That's obviously another non-cash benefit, but of course you lose a little bit of productivity there, right? I think Caselli's question here, I can see it in the chat also, is building on that is, what happens if the skills you're looking for just aren't available locally in that country? Because basically what we call the brain drain, people are emigrating to other countries, to other markets, and that happens in a lot of markets. Unfortunately, you may have to either import talent or repatriate or expatriate talent, right? To bring in expat talent or to repatriate locals, bring them back and attract them. Or you have to look at offshoring. Sometimes you cannot deliver certain technical features or functions in the market because there are not people of that talent there. It is often the case in sub-Saharan Africa that good lawyers will cost more than the same qualification lawyer here in the United States. even though their cost of living may be 1/2, 1/3 of what it is here. But it's because there's such a limited supply of those highly talented local lawyers in some markets that they can get away with charging $300, $400, $500 an hour in the middle of sub-Saharan Africa when their cost of living is very, very cheap. So sometimes you actually have to look at offshoring, not in the traditional take it to a low-cost environment because it's too expensive in the Western world or the developed world, but it may be look at bringing it to the developed world because it's actually cheaper in the developed world than it is in that emerging market. Right? So I think those are all things to look at as potential strategies.
Okay, let's get back to Joe's situation. Sure. So the company now has a well-defined process and organization to handle its core business. The company is profitable, but growth is slowing down. Sorry. Investors are anxious to see the company grow at a faster pace to position itself for an exit. So Joan is not sure how she should expand the business. Should she add functionality to the current platform and grow revenues from existing customers, or reposition the existing platform to serve a new market segment? How should she think about these options?
Yeah, great question. And this ties back a little bit to Hannah's earlier question about pressure from external to maybe scale faster or in directions you might not be ready for, right? So one of the things we would talk about here is looking at what are the real goals of, in this case, the investors. Is it impact? Is it financial return? It's unclear to me if these are impact investors or what I would call more traditional or straight finance investors. But are they, why are they pushing? What are they really trying to achieve here by this exit? I'll assume by the term exit that we mean they want financial return for today's example, but that is a question you want to ask, right? So there are different things, right? You could look at recapitalizing, getting new investors who might be more patient to come in to buy out the existing investors. That doesn't happen often, but that happens occasionally. But assuming that an exit, an actual sale or an IPO is the best route to go, and that's going to satisfy the investors, and that Joe is willing to do that route. And honestly, an IPO is probably less likely than a sale. In this case, it's probably most likely a sale. Then think about who are the buyers. Who wants to buy this organization and why would they buy it? What would they value? Are they valuing the financial return? Are they valuing the impact? Are they valuing the brand name? Are they valuing the employees? All of those questions come to play because whatever those potential buyers are valuing, that's what Joe should be really investing in, if you will, and growing and strengthening to make it more likely that an exit will happen because the buyer sees certain value. How do we maximize or at least increase that value, right? And what are the options, whether it's new products, whether it's charging more, whether it's going deeper and offering new solutions, whether it's finding new customers, a lot of that is going to depend on who's the buyer and what do they want. So mapping the buyer desires to the opportunities and seeing where's the highest overlap would be the advice I would give Joe at this phase.
Great. Thank you so much, Alden. We are coming to the end of the hour. So let me just remind everybody that if you would like further interaction with Alden, and again, thank you for providing this pro bono. Please send me a request with just a brief description of a bit about your situation, and I'll forward it to Alden, and then you can schedule a meeting between the two of you. So the generous offer is for 5 spots, so definitely send them to me when you have that available. And again, Thank you very much, Alden. We really appreciate.
I was happy to do it, Sayuri. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and what a wonderful organization you run to help the social entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for participating. And I'm sorry about the audio troubles in the beginning, and hopefully it got resolved.
Yeah, I think it did. Thanks everyone for joining today, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.